The gala sparkled with diamonds, champagne, and whispers, but all eyes locked on one man. Darius Knight, a billionaire tycoon, walked into the room with a woman who wasn't his wife. His mistress clung to his arm, lips painted scarlet, basking in the attention. Cameras flashed, board members smiled, and in the corner of the ballroom, hushed voices hissed one truth. Where is Naomi? The black woman who built him, who starved to feed him when his empire was nothing more than an idea, who stood by his side when the world mocked him. Tonight she was erased like a stain he wanted forgotten. Darius grinned for the cameras as if his wife never existed, parading his mistress like a trophy. But what Darius didn't know was that the night would not belong to him. Fate was sharpening its blade. Because when the doors at the end of that grand hall burst open, everything would change. The music swelled, the mistress tightened her grip, and Darius lifted his glass for a toast, unaware that his entire empire was about to collapse. Because the black woman he thought he had buried was on her way, and she wasn't coming alone. Naomi Carter Knight had always been more than just the wife. She wasn't some accessory Darius plucked from obscurity. She was the black woman who built the foundation he now stood on. Years ago, when his billionaire dream was nothing but unpaid bills and cold nights, it was Naomi who worked double shifts, sometimes scrubbing offices past midnight with blistered hands. She was the one who pawned her grandmother's wedding ring so Darius could pay the rent on his first office. But success, they say, is the greatest test of loyalty, and Darius failed it miserably. The moment his empire blossomed, Naomi became invisible, a shadow, a burden, a reminder of the past he wanted to erase. He chased boardroom respect and the glitz of high society, while she raised their children in silence, carrying both the weight of his betrayal and the scars of her sacrifices. Naomi was no fool. She saw the mistress long before the gala. The late nights at meetings, the perfume on his suits, the arrogance in his eyes whenever she questioned him. But she stayed quiet, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. Naomi had learned that silence could be sharper than any blade, and when the right moment came, she would strike. That night, while Darius laughed in the arms of another woman, Naomi adjusted her crown, invisible yet radiant. She hadn't just come to watch, she had come to remind the world who she truly was. Because Naomi wasn't just walking into a gala, she was walking into a battlefield. And the weapon she carried was more powerful than Darius could ever imagine, which is the truth and the twins who bore his name. The gala was designed to worship one man, Darius Knight. Crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light, champagne glasses clinked, and the orchestra played a triumphant march as if he were a king returning from conquest. At his side, clinging to his arm like a prize, was the mistress, tall, glittering, smug. Every camera snapped at her smile, every whisper cut at Naomi's absence. But then the music stuttered. The doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open with a force that silenced the room. There she was, Naomi. She didn't rush, she didn't flinch. She descended one step at a time, each click of her heels echoing like judgment. Her gown was a river of black silk, her shoulders draped with diamonds Darius once promised she'd wear only when he made it. And beside her, holding her hands with the quiet strength of royalty, were the twins, their twins. The crowd gasped. Phones lifted. Eyes darted between Naomi and Darius like they were watching a battlefield unfold. And for the first time in years, Darius's mask cracked. His mistress tightened her grip on his arm, but he couldn't move. Naomi didn't need to speak. Her presence alone was an indictment. The children, carbon copies of their father, were proof of the bloodline he had tried to bury. And Naomi, looking radiant, unbroken, untouchable, was proof that betrayal could be turned into spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Naomi's voice rang clear, commanding the microphone a waiter nervously handed her. "I thought tonight was about celebrating family, legacy, truth. So here we are." The crowd erupted. Some were shocked, some in delight, and Darius, his empire, his pride, his mistress all trembled under the weight of one woman's return. Naomi had arrived, and nothing in that room would ever be the same. The ballroom that had once belonged to Darius now pulsed with Naomi's presence. Every eye followed her as if she were the true guest of honor. Yet beneath the glittering lights, tension crawled like smoke, suffocating and inescapable. The mistress, Clarissa Vale, leaned close to Darius. She's humiliating you. Do something, she hissed, her smile frozen for the cameras, but her fingers trembled against his sleeve. Darius clenched his jaw, his empire of control slipping with every flash of Naomi's diamonds. He had designed this gala to announce a new merger, a triumph that would crown him in front of his investors. Yet now the room wasn't whispering about deals or profits, they were whispering about Naomi. The wife he had discarded, the twins he had denied, the queen who had returned. Naomi held the microphone like it was a scepter. Her gaze scanned the room of investors, celebrities, journalists before landing on Darius. That look alone burned hotter than any speech. "Many of you remember me," she began, her tone velvet wrapped around steel. "For those who don't, I'm Naomi Knight, the black woman who stood beside Darius before the empire, before the glass towers and luxury jets, the woman he erased." A ripple coursed through the room. Clarissa stiffened. Darius's face flushed dark, but Naomi didn't falter. She placed her hand on the shoulders of the twins, their eyes wide but steady. These are his children, his legacy, flesh and blood he thought he could bury beneath his greed, but you can't erase the truth. Gasps echoed, and somewhere in the crowd a champagne glass shattered. The cameras pivoted from Darius to Naomi, flashing furiously, recording every word. Darius moved to step forward, but Naomi's voice cut sharper than a blade. "Sit down, Darius. Tonight isn't yours anymore." The room broke into murmurs of investors whispering about betrayal, board members exchanging nervous glances, journalists scribbling with feverish delight. And then, almost as if fate demanded it, a hand went up from the crowd. It was Victor Caldwell, one of the most ruthless financiers in the industry, a man whose opinion could crush or crown an empire. His lips curved into a sly smile. "Well," he drawled, "this is the kind of honesty I like to see. Maybe it's time we reassess who the real power in this company is." The crowd buzzed louder. Clarissa's smile faltered, and for the first time in years, Naomi felt the ground shift beneath her feet in her favor. But Naomi wasn't naive. She knew Darius wouldn't crumble so easily. If tonight was a battlefield, this was only the first strike. As the music resumed weakly and the gala limped forward, whispers followed Naomi through every step. Some eyes burned with admiration, others with jealousy, and still others with raw curiosity. One thing was clear, she had forced the world to see her again. But that visibility came with danger, and Darius, humiliated before his empire, would not forgive. The gala's golden lights shimmered as if nothing had changed, but the energy in the room told a different story. Naomi had seized the spotlight, and Darius's empire of lies trembled beneath her heels. Still, Darius forced a laugh, raised his glass, and tried to spin control back into his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, though his voice strained at the edges, "let us not mistake drama for business. Tonight is about progress, about a future my leadership will continue to guarantee." A few polite claps echoed, thin and hesitant, but Naomi wasn't finished. She stepped forward again, her posture regal, her twins holding her hands. Her voice rang through the ballroom like a verdict. "Future?" she repeated. "You speak of a future you no longer own, Darius, because the truth is this: your empire is rotting, and I have proof." The crowd stilled. Even the orchestra faltered, strings quivering in mid-air. Naomi reached into her clutch and unfolded a folder crisp, thick, and damning. She held it high for the cameras. "These are financial records, shell companies, secret accounts, embezzlement, and worst of all, illegal deals struck under the table, signed by none other than Darius Knight himself. He's not a visionary. He's a fraud. A man who stole from his own shareholders while parading around with his mistresses and pretending to be untouchable." Gasps tore through the room like thunder. Journalists lunged forward, their cameras flashing wildly. Investors' faces turned pale. Some muttered curses, others whispered phone calls already being placed to lawyers. Darius's glass shattered against the floor, wine spilling like blood. "You are a liar!" he roared, but his voice cracked under the weight of panic. Naomi's eyes glinted, calm and sharp. "Am I? Because these documents are already with the press, and by morning they'll be on every headline in the country." Clarissa staggered back, her hand gripping Darius's arm. "You told me this was under control." "Shut up!" Darius snapped, but his voice was drowned out by the rising storm in the crowd. Naomi didn't flinch. She took her twins by the hands and turned slowly, her gown trailing like a banner of triumph. The cameras captured every detail: her unshakable grace, the children's quiet strength, the billionaire's collapse. Then Victor Caldwell, the ruthless financier from earlier, let out a low chuckle. "Well, well," he said, "looks like the king just lost his crown." And in that single moment, Naomi wasn't just the discarded wife. She was the black woman who had rewritten the story, turning her pain into power, her silence into a sword. Because Naomi had chosen fire, and the flames were only getting higher. Naomi had left the ballroom bathed in camera flashes, her twins clinging to her hands like anchors of truth. To the crowd, she looked untouchable, a queen reclaiming her throne. But behind the scenes, the storm had already begun. Darius wasn't just furious, he was dangerous. The moment the doors closed, he barked orders into his phone, his voice sharp with rage. "Shut it down, all of it. Journalists, investors, I don't care what it costs. Destroy her before the sun comes up." Clarissa clung to his arm, her eyes wild. "She can't do this to you, to us." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Naomi soon realized just how brutal his revenge would be. Within hours, her bank accounts were frozen. Her credit cards declined at the gas station. A lawyer's notice was shoved under her door, Darius filing for full custody of the twins, branding her unfit with fabricated evidence. Even worse, the media twisted fast. Darius's PR machine pumped lies into her. Bitter ex-wife fabricates claims. Mother of twins on emotional rampage. Gala drama, scorned woman seeks revenge. Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, her phone buzzing non-stop with threats, hate, and mockery. The twins slept in the next room, unaware of the knives being sharpened against their mother. For the first time in years, tears blurred Naomi's vision. Had she unleashed a war she couldn't win? A knock rattled the door. When Naomi opened it, a man in a black suit shoved a folder into her hands. "Consider this a warning," he muttered before vanishing into the night. Inside the folder were photos grainy but clear. Someone had been following her and the twins. Every school pickup, every grocery trip, every vulnerable moment captured and cataloged. Naomi's chest tightened. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about power, about survival. For a flicker of a moment, fear threatened to crush her. But then, through the crack in the bedroom door, she saw the twins curled together, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the war their parents were waging. Her fear hardened into resolve. If Darius wanted war, Naomi would give him one. And this time, she wouldn't fight with silence. She would fight with fire. The smear campaigns, the frozen accounts, the custody threats, they all pressed down on Naomi like iron chains. For days, she lived in the eye of a hurricane. Every news anchor spitting venom, every phone call, another betrayal. Darius had money, influence, and power. On paper, she had nothing. But Naomi had something Darius could never buy: truth. And allies who had been silent until now began to step into the light. It started with a call from an old friend, Lila Monroe, a journalist Naomi once helped when she was struggling. Lila's voice buzzed through the receiver, urgent and fierce. "Naomi, I saw the folder. I saw the accounts. If you're ready to burn him, I'll publish everything. But I need more. Harder evidence. Do you have it?" Naomi's hands trembled as she thought of the documents she'd hidden years ago. Records of Darius's early deals, forged signatures, offshore accounts. She had buried them for the sake of peace, but now they were a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. And then came another ally, one she never expected: Victor Caldwell. The same financier who had smirked at the gala now sat across from her in a quiet cafe, his sharp eyes softened with respect. "Darius thinks he owns the board," Victor said, swirling his coffee. "But half of them are ready to abandon him. They just need a leader strong enough to rally behind. Be that leader, Naomi. Step into the light. I'll stand behind you." For the first time in weeks, Naomi felt something powerful stir inside her hope. Not the fragile kind that could be crushed with one headline, but the steel kind forged in betrayal, sharpened by pain. That night, Naomi stood before the mirror, her twins asleep in the next room. Her reflection stared back at her. A black woman bruised but unbroken, a queen stripped of her crown but not her dignity. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "You thought I was finished, Darius, but I'm just beginning." Her plan was simple and devastating. She would gather every piece of evidence, rally the board, and turn the empire Darius built into a weapon against him. By the time she was done, he wouldn't just lose his fortune. He would lose his throne, his mistress, and the mask he wore before the world. The boardroom was packed, every seat filled with power players who once bowed to Darius. Cameras lined the walls, broadcasting live for transparency, a move Naomi herself demanded. The world was watching. Darius walked in first, smug as ever, his mistress clinging to his arm. He wore the look of a man convinced he was untouchable. Then Naomi entered. Not broken, not bowed, but regal. Her twins walked beside her, dressed in tailored suits like heirs to an empire. The room fell into silence. Naomi's voice cut through the tension like glass. This isn't about marriage anymore. This is about corruption. This is about betrayal. And today I will show you who Darius Cade truly is. One by one, she unveiled the evidence. Forged documents, offshore accounts, illegal deals buried under shell companies. The mistress's luxury lifestyle was funded with stolen company money. With each slide that flashed on the projector, the board gasped, investors whispered, and Darius's face shifted from arrogance to panic. "No, this is lies," Darius barked, slamming the table. But the more he shouted, the smaller he looked. The mistress tried to stand tall, but Naomi turned to her with a single, devastating blow. "You thought you were his prize, but you were nothing more than an expense line, one that's now public record." The mistress paled. The cameras caught it all. By the end of Naomi's presentation, Victor Caldwell rose and placed a hand on her shoulder. The board recognizes Naomi Cade as interim chairwoman, effective immediately. The room erupted not in chaos but in applause. Investors shook her hand, journalists swarmed her, and Darius? Security escorted him out, his mistress abandoning him halfway down the hall. Naomi didn't just reclaim her place. She took everything, his company, his reputation, his crown. That night, Naomi stood on the balcony of her new office, the twins at her side, city lights glittering beneath her like jewels. She whispered softly, not for the cameras, not for the board, but for herself. "You tried to bury me, Darius, but you forgot. Queens don't bow, they rise." And rise she did not as his wife, not as his shadow, but as the empire's true ruler. Darius tried to fight back in court, but his empire was already gone. His allies scattered like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The mistress gave interviews crying betrayal, but the world had moved on. Nobody remembered her name. Naomi, however, became a symbol, not just of power, but of resilience. Women whispered her story in salons and offices. She stood up. She fought back. She won. Young girls saw her and realized that being underestimated could be their greatest weapon. At home, things were quieter. Her twins no longer whispered in fear about their father's cruelty. They laughed again, chasing each other across the polished floors of the mansion Naomi now owned outright. And when Naomi tucked them in at night, they no longer asked, "Mommy, are we safe?" Now they said, "Mommy, you're the strongest queen in the world." Naomi would stand at the mirror some nights, staring at the reflection of the woman she had become. No longer the silent partner in a billionaire's shadow. No longer the loyal wife left behind for someone shinier, but a black woman who took humiliation and turned it into a crown. On the anniversary of her victory, she hosted her own gala. This time she didn't walk in behind anyone. She walked first, her twins holding her hands, her gown shimmering like fire. Cameras flashed, but instead of whispers of pity, there was thunderous applause. And as she looked out at the world that once mocked her, she smiled. Revenge, she thought, was never about destroying him. It was about rebuilding me. And she had rebuilt herself into something untouchable. Naomi's story ends not in bitterness, but in brilliance. A reminder to anyone watching that when life tries to bury you, sometimes it's only planting the seed of your rebirth. If this story of resilience, power, and brutal revenge touched you, drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and be sure to subscribe to Colorless Voices for more stories that prove, no matter how dark the betrayal, queens always rise.